Oh, I'm so sorry. You haven't been hearing me all this while. Um, Great. So, welcome to the 27th day of Diversity Mahotsav. On behalf of Team Avatar and myavatar.com, I'm happy to welcome you all. I hope there are no more glitches today as we begin with a fantastic session lined up for you today from our ideology partners, Strive. Exciting. I'm Rashmi Ravindran, and I'll be your host for today. As we start, here are a few hygiene checks for a seamless virtual experience. I'm sure you're all pros by now. Please close all other applications on your computer and log out from your organization's VPN to conserve internet bandwidth. Once again, extremely thrilled and delighted to welcome you all to the 27th day of Diversity Mahotsav, presented by myavatar.com, India's only diversity portal with jobs, events, skilling programs, webinars, and more for all the underrepresented groups at the workplace. As we step into the last week of this month-long celebration, we would like to take a moment to thank all of you who have been logging in every day. You truly represent the hope of change that we wish to bring to this world. For those who have joined us today, we are delighted to have you on board, and we hope you would join us for the rest of the finale week. We would like to take this time to thank our partners for Diversity Mahotsav 2021, ideology partners, Cognizant, HCL Technologies Limited, and Strive. Supporting partners, Forasia India Private Limited, Logitech Engineering and Designs India Private Limited, Saint-Gobain India Private Limited, Sodexo, and Zorian Solutions, and community partner, NASCOM. Our social media hashtags are hashtag Diversity Mahotsav, hashtag Celebrating Diversity. We look forward to you posting your experiences and learnings at Diversity Mahotsav on your social media handles using these hashtags. Let's begin our 27th day with the 27th edition of Soundbites, a series where our founder president, Dr. Soundarya Rajesh, answers some of the pertinent questions that she has been addressing on different aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion in her 21-year career of being the subject matter expert. Dr. Soundarya is an award-winning pioneer in this field, and her work in the space of DEI is unparalleled in the country. A second career woman herself, she pioneered the second career movement in India Inc. and is a relentless advocate of the potential of women in the workplace. She has also won several accolades and awards, such as the hashtag 100 Women Achiever Award from the Government of India, Web Wonder Women by Twitter and Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, Winds of Change 2019 Award by the Forum of Inclusion at Minnesota, Women Transforming India Award, Golden Aviator Award, Asia's Most Innovative Diversity and Inclusive Leaders Award, and so on. Let's hear it from the expert.
Non-conscious biases actually have a direct bearing on people-related decisions in every workplace. I'm going to talk about 4 biases today. The first is affinity bias, which arises from similarities. The second, anchoring bias, is when you form a judgment or you make a decision about a person based on the first piece of information about them that you come across. The third is the confirmation bias, which means we only refer to that information that supports the views or opinions that we have already formed. And the fourth, horn bias, when a person is evaluated based only on negative aspects.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soundarya, for that. Individuals' biases are indeed huge barriers to an organization's DI goals, isn't it? That was insightful. And now, on to our next session for the day, Breakthrough Thoughts. We have Mr. Prabhakar Bisain, Chief Operating Officer, Strive, who will address the topic, Don't Stop Believing, the DEI Journey. If you thought, what does a rock band have to do with DEI? Well, I'm sure you will change your mind after this session today. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Prabhakar Bisain to all of you. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Strive and leads Strive's global operations, service delivery, business and technology solutions, apart from leading the research content services and education content services businesses. He's an accomplished and seasoned global leader with an extensive track record in creating and setting up operations at scale across multiple geographies and industries. At Strive, Prabhakar continues to drive revenue growth and ensures operational excellence while leading the company's operational and technological transformation journey. Before joining Strive, Prabhakar was with Cognizant Technology Solutions as Vice President and Global Head for the company's healthcare digital operations, delivering industry leading growth from 2015 through 2018. Previously, he was Cognizant's country head in the Philippines and the global head for insurance PPS. Prior to joining Cognizant, Prabhakar was the president and CEO of WNS Philippines. He has spent over 20 years in the IT and business process services industry with leadership roles in different geographies. Prabhakar started his career with Tata Motors. He is a graduate in electrical engineering from Dayal Bagh Educational Institute, Agra, and is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad. Based in Manila, Philippines, Prabhakar is passionate about reading and music. Looking forward to this amazing session. Over to you, Mr. Bising.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you for this introduction, and a big thanks to the entire Avatar team for continuing the whole agenda of DEI across the industry. I'm really glad to be honored with this invitation, and humbled with the opportunity to speak on this event. And let me just put a disclaimer that I'm not a expert in DEI at all by any means. I'm just a practitioner. I don't have frameworks. I don't have a big number or big data to share today as to what do we do on DI or how the world should solve it. I'll basically put a practitioner's view here and just look at some of my own experience as I traverse the journey of leadership and dealt with DEI as a key agenda item on the leadership team which I managed or the organization that I work for. Let me start by sharing my presentation, and then can you see my screen? All right, so the topic as Rasmi shared is don't stop believing, the DEI journey. You must be wondering as to what is don't stop believing got to do with DEI and got a rock band called Journey to do with DEI. But let me just spend some time on how I relate this whole rock band called Journey to DEI itself. As Rasmi mentioned, I'm passionate about music, and I'm also even more passionate about looking for leadership lessons from rock bands. And I have my own collection of thoughts there, but I'll talk about that on some other day. But in the context of DEI, one rock band which kind of stands out is Journey. And the reason I'm talking about that is it started as a band in 1973 in San Francisco with 5 members. It got on to be a very famous rock band from 1978 onwards. For on its peak of fame in the 80s, it released a song called "Don't Stop Believing," which went to top the charts in those years in 81 to 84. And then in 87, when on the peak of its band's journey, Steve Perry, who was a lead singer of this band, who's here in this particular picture, decided to move out of band for differences he had with the rest of the group members. And that felt like that the group is coming to an end. The rest of the group looked for talent. It made a lot of experiments with different lead singers from different other bands, and invited people, did a talent hunt and so on and so forth. It tried to relaunch itself. It didn't work out at all. So they kind of losing hope on restarting Journey, and did some small gigs here and there. And then they chanced upon a video of a gentleman back in Philippines who was singing in a small street bar. His name was Arnel Pinada. So Arnel was a Filipino, a completely nondescript singer. He was basically a street singer. had no personality for that matter to be a rock star or to replace Steve Perry. But Journey was so impressed with the talent he had that they brought him on board. They brought him on board in June, in around end of 2007. And they started a new album called Journey Revolution in January 2008. The Arnel, as you can see in the picture here, is someone who was completely nondescript street singer. He went on to become the lead singer for the band. When he got onto the band and this whole Revolution album came onto the street, in the music market, the band faced a lot of racial slur, saying that you got a guy from Asia who don't know how to sing, he doesn't have personality, and all kind of stuff went on. But Journey steadfastly moved forward with Arnel Pineda as their lead singer. And in my opinion, that's the biggest embodiment of DEI in any business. One of the biggest embodiment. Arnel was diverse. He was Asian, while the rest of the group was all Caucasian. He was from a very poor background, while the rest of the band was very rich and famous. He was also given the main stage, and typically in a rock band, lead singer is the lead person in the band. So he was given the main stage, he was given the lead position, and he went on to rebuild the band. So much so that they don't stop believing, as Arnel Pineda launched it once again, became the most downloaded song on Apple iTunes in 2009, which was produced before 2000. So it has a record of sorts of being the most downloaded song from the 80s being downloaded in year 2009, 2010. And it still has that record. So that goes to prove the kind of talent he brought to the table. And then Journey got empaneled in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017, and the story went on. Obviously, the members have gone old, so they don't produce so much of music, but the whole story of Journey has been so fascinating from the perspective of DEI. And what held Journey together, along with Arnel Pineda, was the fact that he had talent, he had skill, and he had the promise to fulfill what Journey had, and therefore he held his position in the band, and the rest of the band completely embraced him with open arms. That's another song of Journey, by the way. So this whole story is so inspiring for me that I continue to draw this and talk about this whole inspiration that we draw from this whole event itself in the context of DEI. And as we talk about that, I also would talk about another personal experience about DEI, and this is my own journey with the whole building on the DEI agenda in my leadership career. So in around 2008, when the word DEI was kind of not discussed so much, it was heard in some forums, far and few in between. The term LGBTQ was not discussed so openly. I came from India, where these things were not discussed so much, and then they continue to be more like some terms you see on internet and some of the readings per se, but not discussed so openly. So I got moved to Philippines to start an absolutely new venture for WNS back in 2008. And I had the responsibility of not just setting up the company, but also hire lots of people, the entire leadership, to set up the company from scratch. And so I was doing a lot of hiring in Philippines, and this was my first leadership experience while I've worked abroad in different situations, but this was my first experience to lead a company and then build it from scratch in a completely foreign world. So I was learning on the fly different things as to how to run the company, how to build a team, and so on and so forth. And I distinctly remember back in January 2009, I was hiring for a very senior leadership role in my team. And I came across a resume. I felt it was very compelling from the skill set that was mentioned. The name sounded like of a gentleman. So I called him for the interview. And when this gentleman came into my conference room, he had hip-long hair, and his handshake was very effeminate. So I was just wondering that, will this person be able to fit the kind of role I have in mind? Because I have this whole, not just unconscious bias, a very conscious bias that I'm looking at someone who probably doesn't fit in my mental frame of that particular role, or the person that like to fit. I would like to see I would like to be in that particular role itself. But the person gave all the right answers. He had absolutely right experience. I felt that he was the right fit from skill set perspective and talent perspective. It's just that I could not kind of come across or deal with the persona itself. Typically, after the interview, I send an email to HR saying that I'm good with this candidate or not good with this candidate. But in this case, I sat on the candidature or this person's interview results for almost 2 days, and I kept thinking to myself that what will my peer group think about it if I hire this person? What will my leaders think about it? What will my clients think about it? Because he'll be facing clients as well. And I was just trying to conjecture things on behalf of my clients, on behalf of my leaders, on behalf of my peers, not necessarily talking to them to understand what kind of view they had. But after 2-3 days of deliberation, I just thought to myself that if this person has the right skill set, has the right talent, right experience, right competency, why should we not give him the role? It doesn't matter as to if he has a very different kind of preference or dressing style or things that he would like to do outside of office. And we ended up giving the role to him, and we were glad that we hired him. He brought a lot of change to the organization, and he ended up being one of the senior guys in the company as well. So that's how my own kind of introduction to the whole concept of DEI happened back in 2009, 2010. And we went on to, as we built the organization, we went on to continue to work on this and made sure that everybody who came on board also recognized this whole concept itself. And in the absence of a kind of a very formal structure or framework, we worked on our own framework, which basically was about acknowledging the fact that there'll be differences in gender, in sexual preferences, in dressing styles, in race, and in nationality, and so on and so forth, and making sure that we all, first of all, acknowledge that and be aware of what we need to do, what is the agenda that we need to have, and then keep talking about it in different forums. Don't feel tired about talking about it. Keep talking about it and make sure the awareness gets built onto the organization, especially when you're building an organization from scratch. It's very important that everyone understands it and sings from the same hymn sheet. And then start building on alignment, which is making sure that all the policies that you write, all the structures that you create are aligned to these thinking or aligned to the sole concept of DEI. And finally, keep doing assessment of how we are doing, not just in terms of how the person is doing in the particular role, and then we continue to drop on his talent and experience or her talent and experience, but also assess that how our employees are feeling about what we are doing in terms of the awareness that we are building, alignment that we are running, and then do they feel good, do they feel trusted, do they feel happy in the environment they operate in. And this kind of became the informal framework on which we ran the organization. I'm glad that we ran on a very happy, engaged workforce there. It continues to thrive today, although I have dissociated myself with the team. And I continue to be in touch with most of these people there who were hired during those times, and they're leading the company today in different positions. So that's my own personal experience of DEI has been. So as I said, I'm not an expert, but I continue to draw upon my personal experience to make sure that we keep doing right things and keep it more and more and better as we move forward. Now, talking about Strive, I'll just quickly spend 5 minutes on telling you what Strive is, and then we'll talk about what is our DEI agenda at Strive. Strive we are a leading service provider in the space of technology-driven content and data operations. We work with almost all of the leading publishers, most of the leading universities in US and UK and Europe, and we also work with majority of data and science companies which are selling data as a product in the market. We have a very optimal blend of technology and process expertise as well as domain. We have 17,000 people across the globe with our centers in 8 different countries. A lot of multilingual delivery that we do, and we have 100+ customers, and it's always growing. In terms of the construct of business, we have focus on data. We focus on unstructured data, making sure that we make meaning out of unstructured data and give it to our clients. Content from the perspective of research, academic, and reference content that goes back to the consumers or to support the research and science industry itself. And finally, EdTech, which has got even further pushed during this pandemic, is the whole focus on how do we take our learning to digital, the whole focus on e-learning, and supporting the publishers, universities, as well as corporates as they traverse their journey from traditional learning styles to digital, and also ensuring that they continue to have right content for that. And obviously, there are 2 horizontals of support and technology, which run across all these 3 verticals that we have. And as we have been in the business for a long time, there have been a lot of recognition that's been coming to us. But just in terms of how we are distributed geographically, we have businesses in Asia. We have large centers in India and in Philippines. We have centers in Vietnam, China, Nicaragua, and United States. And then we have offices in Singapore and United Kingdom. So we bring in a very diverse set of employees, very diverse set of styles, and all that we can think of in terms of diversity is there for us to deal with and to celebrate inside the organization. And as we work on making sure that the entire organization comes together is bound by certain cultural values, we have 5 of them: respect, meritocracy, and motivation, innovation, accountability, and client focus. And respect, in our opinion, is the key binding theme or the key operating word as far as DEI is concerned. So making sure that it's an absolute, unqualified, unemotional, and impersonal respect for everyone who's there inside the company, irrespective of which race, gender, demography, or performance they have. Also making sure that we have fairness across the organization. We are continuing to listen to what's being said and what's being discussed in the organization. We run a flat organization, not necessarily in terms of number of levels, but more in terms of accessibility, making sure that we have open doors and people can walk in and have the conversation and without any fear of retribution. And finally, having the trust and openness and being as transparent and objective about performance, about what we're doing and our actions as much as practically possible. So that has been the driving factor behind our whole agenda for DEI. And if I talk about the DEI agenda itself, obviously there are 5 tenets for the DEI agenda at Strive. The topmost of that is leadership commitment. All of us as leaders have committed to DEI practices, and we work with the teams to make sure that we have the right framework and continue to finesse that, and also create the shared understanding around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Accountability for all is also another key important thing, and it's not just about having a few people just being responsible for this, but making sure that it's all pervasive across the organization. Having the company advocacy and external engagement as well, not just about staying within the 4 walls of the company, but going across the communities and societies that help us get this talent and making sure that we are making impact on them as well and are bringing in the right level of inclusion. Talent acquisition, so to make sure that we have anticipated future needs, we get the right talent and as diverse as practically possible to fit the job needs, that the skills needs that we have in the organization, and prepare the talent for that. And finally, the mobility for the talent as well across the organization. Interesting thing that we have seen, and I continue to advocate about talent acquisition, is that in past so many years, and even in our previous roles, we have always focused on employee referral as a key thing, a key source of talent inside the organization. In my opinion, if you start start focusing on employee referral as a key source of talent, you're actually working against the agenda of DEI. You're trying to bring homogeneity in the organization because the employees like to bring the people who are similar to them, and they try to bring to Sandhya's word, affinity bias in the organization and anchoring bias as well. So if we can broad base the talent acquisition funnel itself, if we take it to the colleges and universities first and try to get fresher talent instead of lateral talent, we do away with a lot of these biases as well, and that helps us drive the agenda of DEI across the organization instead of trying to get a lot of talent which comes as referral and therefore brings homogeneity in the company as well. And as we have pursued the whole concept of the whole agenda of DEI, there are a lot of programs that our teams run across the organization. Reignite is one of them, which is basically about second career for our women leadership. We've seen over several years, women folk come into the company, they do certain roles very, very well, and then suddenly they move out of the workforce because they need to take care of their families. They need to move to a different city altogether. So we run a very focused program on giving the second career for the women employees in the company, and I'm seeing great success in that. We have lots of great examples of how these leaders have come back, started their second career, and now they've reached to very senior levels inside the organization. As we do that, we also had this intentional career pathing curtain raiser webinar. We are working with Avatar here to make sure that we bring that awareness inside our teams, making sure that our mid-career women fully recognize the potential they have and what they can do inside the organization as well, and then helping the whole Reignite program to get a better shape as we move forward. So thanks to Avatar team for running this program for us and giving us a framework. We also have this leadership development program, which is focused on making sure that the diverse talent is given the right leadership intervention as well. It's not just about the high performers and people who are there in the front and speak louder get this opportunity, but we continue to broad base our development programs across the organization and especially give it to people who need it from the perspective of being a little more vulnerable from diversity and other angles perspective. And finally, continue to talk about the whole agenda of DEI and the understanding about it across the organization, and more so around the unconscious bias which takes place in the workplace. So some of these things are day-to-day stuff which is being done, and continue to reinforce the whole agenda of DEI in the organization. And awareness, acknowledgement, as I talked about in my initial framework as well, are the key important things, and these are all going to make sure that it continues to build across the organization. But interestingly, as a service provider which is in the space of education, academics, and research, we also help our clients and these industries to be more inclusive. For example, most of the educational and academic content today needs to be accessible for people who are visually impaired. So we have built technologies. We've also worked with our client to make sure that we provide them accessibility solutions to ensure that the content get consumed by the people who are less privileged and who are visually impaired or impaired with some other things as well. So making sure that the content is machine readable. There's alternative text being provided for all pictures, graph tables, and everything else as well, to make sure that we have color contrast, we have the reading sequence defined, and everything else that goes on to ensure that the content can be consumed by somebody who's visually impaired is very key. So we work with our clients on that particular aspect. The other thing which we are seeing is becoming more and more front and center with our clients in terms of making sure that the content is actually DEI, curated for DEI. So normally something which have been written 5 years, 10 years back without DEI in mind, the whole content may have a particular bias in terms of the graphics being used, the pictures being used, the names being used, or the characters being used. So the clients are looking to us saying that, can you remediate this whole content to make sure that it is neutral from that perspective and fits the agenda, their agenda of DEI and the products they are taking to market as well. So some of these things we are actually working with the clients, not just to strengthen DEI agenda in our own organization, but also help them in their DEI agenda and the industry in general per se as well. And then finally, Project Link is something where we have taken the whole DEI or the need for support for people who have not been very inclusive, who have not been included in the process, to ensure that they come up the curve as well. And especially during the pandemic, we've seen there's a significant amount of learning gap and education gap has been created. Kids have not been go to school. So we've run programs like Parenting in Pandemic or Bouncing Back Better programs, which is basically focused on creating content and helping the kids of our employees learn and bridge the gap that has been created because of pandemic. So the employees or the faculties come from our own employee groups. The content come from our own employee groups as well, and we are able to really help some of our parents inside the organization to bridge this gap for their kids. And we're seeing some great results coming out of that. So this is a few illustrative examples of how we've been able to impact not just our own organization, but also communities around us, the clients that we work with, and the industry in which we operate. So as we go through this, the key is also to reassess the opportunities that are there, which are being brought in by the changing environment, the changing landscape. The first one is, I would say, the whole opportunity of reskilling. As we continue to strengthen the workforce and make sure that they are prepared to be ready for the next phase of growth, next phase of learning, we are seeing that almost 50% of our employees, and in fact, it's an industry number itself, would need to be reskilled in the next 4 to 5 years' time. And as we look at which are these skills that are needed, obviously, a lot of studies has been done. Some of the illustrative list is here, which is more around problem solving, self-management, working with people, and some specific technology use and development needs, which can be administered and people can gain mastery on it in a span of 1 to 5 months or so. So it's something that everyone is working on to ensure that we are able to provide level playing field for all the employees in the organization, irrespective of whether they belong to a diverse group or they're part of the group in general, per se. And we're also seeing that if you look at Coursera, there are a lot of statistics around how many are women folks in this new learner population that's there at Coursera. And this number has been improving year after year. And there's a significant change which has happened in the last 2 years' time, where almost in every measurement type that you see in this particular graphic here, things have moved up by anywhere from 5 to 10 percentage points in terms of the participation of women in the learning process itself. That goes to prove that there is a desire, there is a lot of focus as well from the corporations and the companies to make sure that we focus on diversity, we bring everyone at par, and we give everyone an opportunity to be inclusive in the growth of the organization. And we're also seeing that in the last few years that this whole the S part of ESG, which is the social, is taking far more mainstream and it's becoming not just the middle word, but the front and center of the entire focus on DEI as well. So things around empowering women and boosting growth, enough studies have been done as to how, if we had women folks educated in certain countries, how the world economy could go to almost $20 trillion boost in the next few years' time. And similarly, as we look at some of these large corporations, especially the Fortune 500 companies, what are their LGBT inclusion policies, how they are looking at the society around them. And they have redone their policies to have non-discrimination around sexual orientation, non-discrimination around gender identity, including domestic partner benefits and transgender inclusive benefits. So that goes to prove that it's no longer just purely in a discussion in a small conference room, no longer discussion as within the kind of four walls of the company. It's going well beyond that. It's becoming an industry phenomena, it's becoming a country phenomena, and it's becoming an economy discussion as well. So we continue to see this kind of momentum building up, which is all the right thing. And we're glad that all of us are acknowledging this, recognizing the need, and continue to work towards that. So in terms of what's next, while in the graphic before this on the Coursera, we talked about, or we saw that the whole comparison was how many women folk are coming into the workforce, how many women are getting better opportunities to learn. But in my opinion, gender is not about only focus on diversity. Is not the only focus on diversity, and more so if we recall this whole George Floyd incident, which happened in May 2020, that has brought in a very different focus altogether on racial diversity as well. And that has become the front and center of every CEO's conversation today. And therefore, everyone is recognizing that it's not just about gender, it's about, and not just about preferences. It's also about racial discrimination. It's also about color discrimination and everything else as well. So we are seeing that kind of getting into the discussions of DEI, and we're glad to see that movement happening. And we'll see more and more of it as an organization to be embraced, but also across societies and countries and economies as well. The other thing which I feel that we should not ignore the impact of pandemic. We did talk about some of these programs that we've run around parenting in pandemic or bridging the gap, learning gaps and all that. But the pandemic has also left a large part of the workforce very vulnerable, which is the women folk who have to take care of their kids, who have to take care of the families, who have to probably move to a different city altogether because their parents live there and so on and so forth. So it has brought a very different kind of dynamics. And then we need to make sure that as pandemic seems to be kind of a part and parcel of our lives these days, how do we change gears in our DEI agenda itself to ensure that we don't let some of these folks to be more vulnerable than they've been in the past. So we have to embrace and define and design programs to ensure that we are accounting for the impact of pandemic in the workforce. And then shifting the focus to action from awareness. We all talked about building awareness, making sure that everyone knows about it, everyone talks about it, but eventually we have to make sure that we are taking actions, and those actions are also measurable. So make sure that we are, first of all, demonstrating a lot of actions in terms of how we are hiring people, how we are promoting them in the workforce, how we are giving them a seat at the table inside the organization, and how do they have their voice, but also measure the impact on, take some measurable goals and then show the progress on that. If you show transparency in how you measure and have the data, it'll make a huge difference around how the employee or the workforce itself looks at you, and the societies around you looks at you as well. So these, in my opinion, are going to be the key focus areas for all of us, as well as the industry, to work on in the coming few quarters, if not years. And this is accountability of all. This is not just accountability of a few senior leaders or just the DEI council in the company. Everyone has to be wearing this agenda on their sleeve and make sure that we are behaving in alignment with this agenda itself. In summary, and I'm stealing it from Dr. Soundarya's speech itself, diversity is a program. You can start it, run it very, very well. And you can see some success as well in terms of that you're hiring more women, you're hiring more people who have different gender preferences, you're hiring more people from different nationalities, but that doesn't solve the problem per se of DEI. Equity is a principle. You can embrace that as a principle and make sure that you're giving everyone the right opportunity. But the most difficult part of this whole journey of DEI is inclusion. That's where the test of the entire agenda comes to play. Making sure that all that we've done around diversity and equity comes to fruition, and we're able to really see the impact of these people who got into the organization, given the seat at the table as well, are able to really deliver the impact on the organization's progress. And that's the key thing. And it's a process. It's something which will go on for a long time. It won't happen overnight. It's also a practice that you need to make sure that you're perfecting it by working at it day in and day out. And therefore, I would say we don't need to stop believing. We need to make sure that we stay invested in the agenda of DEI. We need to make sure that we are going after it untiringly and making sure that we eventually see the results improving day after day, quarter after quarter, year after year. And therefore, the journey continues. Thank you very much for your attention and focus on this. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Prabhakar. It was definitely not as you had presented it to be, like, without a framework. It was absolutely amazing. And one of the things that really, inspired me was this bit about, it's probably even personal, because you talked about sustainable business, right? And you talked about how the area of education, and you have been continuing, especially during the pandemic. We realized the importance of everything coming online and whatnot, and definitely the education being a huge focus, not just for students or parents of students, but also for companies. So one of the things that I was wondering was, while yes, you did talk about accessibility being a huge enabler, how do you ensure that there is inclusion in the content itself? Is that important? And I mean, it is important, but how do you ensure that there is inclusion there?
Yeah, so Rashmi, thanks for the question and thanks for the remark as well. See, in our case, we are responsible for some of the content that gets created, but in most cases, the content comes from an author who's written a research paper or a book, and therefore, our responsibility is to make sure that as we look at the content and work with the author, to ensure that it doesn't have any bias, or at least flag the biases. Okay. I remember there was one particular article which was published on a bias itself, but it was picked up by a different group very differently, and there was a lot of noise around that. So therefore, making sure that we are able to tell the authors and work with the publishers to ensure that the content is as neutral as practically possible is one responsibility. In cases where we are ourselves developing the content, we definitely have our own DEI guidelines, as well as the guidelines coming from the publisher for whom we'll be working as well, or the company that'll be working as well, to make sure that it remains neutral and doesn't have any bias at all. So,
Awesome.
and our editorial staff is fully trained on that.
Okay. Yeah, I can completely understand how important that is. And is it based on any other framework? Because in India, we do not have a certain DEI framework per se as a guideline which is given by the government or any body. But is there anything that you are, putting it through, like something that you probably can, arrive at in terms of having it as the Bible for any authors or publishing places? Are you looking at something like that, or is it
So
just
I would say a little, I wouldn't say it's premature, but I don't think a lot of concerted effort has gone in towards building a standard for DEI neutral language use or content per se. For example, for accessibility, there's now a global standards,
yes,
WCAG
yes,
standards, which are used
yes,
across all the sphere of
that's right.
content, and therefore it guides the whole development of content accordingly. But in case of the rest, the DEI neutrality, there is not. I have not come across a standard per se.
Yeah,
But as
yeah,
we work with some of these large corporations, they have their own standard, or they develop certain standards for their content with us, and we make sure that we abide with that. So in terms of,
I
as
understand.
you have certain set of pictures in a book, they should have this much of diversity mix. They should have this kind of language being used in terms of pronouns and so on and so forth. So that we make sure that is there. But as per my knowledge at this point in time, I haven't seen a standard guideline coming through. I'm sure with the focus on this, there would be something coming out very soon.
Yes, yes. I can imagine how customized that gets. And as you said, the way we think I'm sure 20 years ago we didn't have any sort of, and any content from there seems very biased right now when we look at any content that's about even 10 years back or 15 years back. And today there is a new sort of a understood guideline about it, and hopefully that moves to a standard which everybody can follow. We somehow seem to be talking about a lot of framework and standards, though
Yeah.
you just also talked about coming face to face with your own bias, inherent bias, when you met a candidate, and how you did not have a framework, so to speak. But how important do you think a framework in an organization is today, especially given that today things have changed dramatically when it comes to workplace, being a hybrid workplace now post COVID? How important do you think a framework per se is, and how rigid or customizable? I'm sure you have a certain understanding of that. It would be great if you
Sure.
could share that.
So we must have a framework, okay, and then the framework has to be as fluid as practically possible as well, because the times are changing. 2 years back, we had no clue this they will be talking about pandemic
Absolutely.
even in 2021 or getting into
Mhm.
2022. We are still looking at few waves coming in and so on and
That's
so
true.
forth. So
That's true.
obviously, if we create a very rigid framework, it'll break as the
Yeah,
times
yeah,
change. So we have to have the flexibility in that. But without a framework, it'll be very difficult to have the conversation. If someone who's
absolutely.
coming anew to the workforce, how do you go and explain to him or her as to what exactly we mean by DEI, what exactly we mean by diversity itself to begin with? So having a framework helps us with that particular dissemination of information to begin with, and also gives scalability to it. If you don't have a
Absolutely.
framework, you have to have a lot of one-on-one conversations. If you have a framework, you can basically scale it up as well very quickly. And especially in an organization like us, where we have 17, 18,000 people in 8 different countries, if you don't have that, it'll be very difficult to really
Absolutely.
affect the agenda itself.
Absolutely. I'll also be, thank you, because I was just jotting down some questions as you were presenting, and I have some questions here from the audience today as well. Thank you for the questions, everyone, and just taking one of them. Great session. Would like to hear from you the initiatives that you drive from the top to ensure larger inclusion at Strive. Any best practices that you would like to probably talk about?
Yeah, so a few things, and I would say that to a certain extent, the pandemic has come as a blessing in disguise as far as connect with the employees, the dissemination of information, and sheer amount of dialogue we've been able to create, because it has given us few extra hours on our hands. It has also given us the flexibility to meet with a lot of people without traveling per se as well. So I would say one thing which has worked very well is about a lot of face-to-face interaction. And when I say face-to-face, means virtual interaction with our employees. In the last 1 year or 2 years, actually now, between me and my peer group, including our CEO, we have spoken with at least 20% of our workforce, literally one-on-one. That, in my opinion, is a big number. I wouldn't have, even in my lifetime at Stripe, wouldn't be able to do that if I was traveling and trying to meet them in person. So we've been able to meet with them and speak with them in their own language as to what their issues are, how they feel about the organization, and get a first-hand assessment of, are we doing well as far as engagement, as far as building trust, as far as transparency is concerned. And we come across different questions. Some of them they're completely in awe that their senior is speaking to them and therefore they don't have any question, but some are absolutely open and willing to put you on spot in terms of difficult questions as well. So that, in my opinion, is something that we have practiced in the last 2 years. We continue to do that as well, and has worked very well to give us the insight and things that we need to work on. And then we've taken those inputs to drive the change inside the organization as well. The second one I would say is ensuring that all of us, first of all, recognize that being a global organization, there would be diverse genders, diverse nationalities, diverse races, ethnic groups, and so on and so forth. And we cannot have our policies written just for the sake of one particular group. Just because we have 10,000 people in India doesn't mean that every policy has to be aligned to India or the way India operates, thinks, and behaves, basically. So that bring that flexibility and giving that autonomy to the geography in which the policies are being executed is also been one way we have made sure that we bring that we take the bias away, first of all, and then also bring the accountability to the team which is operating and executing those policies in those geographies. So they feel empowered at the same time, and it helps us push the agenda forward.
Absolutely, completely. Is there just taking from there? Is there one thing that you would like to highlight which has actually brought that change? Once you're talking about the new best practices, is there one thing that comes to your mind which has really changed because of this new practice of being able to talk one-on-one? Has it maybe at a personal level or at a policy level?
Yeah. So I'll give it in two parts. One answer is very generic and probably will apply to every company itself, is the fact that we've been able to take our talent marketplace literally global. Okay, earlier it used to be that we have to hire in Chennai, then we hire people from Chennai itself or Pondicherry or from Noida, but today, or in Philippines, but today is something that we are we opened our storefronts virtually across the entire world, basically. And we do have, actually, as part of our content development business, we work with lots of educational retired or people who have passion for education and content, but they don't want to be formally part of the organization. They work with us, and we've been able to take that concept now global. So that's something which has worked very, very well. The fact that we've been able to take this whole program. The second part of this whole answer is that this whole Reignite Amplified, which is basically taking the Reignite program itself to the next level and ensuring that we get the second career women leadership in coming into the organization, is something which has worked very, very well.
Awesome.
And then along with that, giving the flexible workplace policy program, so you can choose to work from anywhere, for that matter. Now, again, this answer can be applicable to a lot of organizations as well, but in our context, we see there are certain roles which may render themselves very well for a perpetual flexible working, or perpetual work from home, for that matter. And we've given that flexibility to the leaders to pick up and ensure that they embrace it and they benefit from it. Absolutely. And the third one is around the fact that this whole Bridging the Gap program, in my opinion, which is basically taking your organization's capability and the time of our employees who are wanting to help bridge the gap of the learning gap which has been created because of pandemic has worked very, very well as well. So some of these things we are very proud of.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm reminded of the ad that is being put out by Lenovo these days about remote work from the mountains and whatnot. So great. And I'm personally, I think at Avatar we were also happy to see the ICP program being taken by Strive. So one of the things that you had mentioned also was improving the DEI quotient. Is that a specific program you want to talk about? What are some of the methods that you use to increase the quotient, the DEI quotient at Strive?
Yeah. So one most practiced and trusted way of building the quotient is to keep talking about it, building the awareness, and if you can test it in some form or manner in terms of making sure there is no unconscious bias coming into the recruitment process, promotion process, recognition process is one way of doing it. But we've also made sure that the questions around this as to how our employees look at DEI programs that we are running as participants in this process. Are they feeling trusted and valued at the workplace? Have now found way into our annual engagement surveys now.
Okay.
And an annual engagement survey is obviously it happens once in a year, but we also have pulse surveys. So we made sure that every 3 months we are reaching out to a distinct set of employees randomly and asking this question. And that gives us the feedback as to which area is not working very well. It could be a geography, it could be a certain group of specialists which is not feeling included, or it could be just in general that we are trying to do a lot of talk here, but it's not landing at the right place. So having a feedback mechanism, albeit virtual in this case, is very helpful, and it has help us tune the agenda moving forward reasonably well. And that's how we measure the quotient.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's equally important to measure it. And just taking another question from the audience, what do you think is the most difficult part in implementing DEI in the organization? I think that was coming. Yeah. There would be the question of what is the difficulty? Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the most difficult part is to just starting to acknowledge itself. I think I'm just talking about my own personal experience. 10, 12 years back, I was absolutely naive, absolutely green between my ears. Did not know how to deal with this. I had my own absolutely deep-rooted biases, if I may call it that way. So bringing the acknowledgement itself is the first and the biggest and the most challenging step.
Very well said.
About diversity. After that, once you come across that hump, then the rest of it is basically very, very manageable.
Yeah. We know exactly what you're talking about here. We have practically seen that happen at almost every organization that we've been working with, and it's amazing to see the kind of acceptance that today we have, and the kind of understanding and awareness that DEI as a subject has in corporate India, and it's really inspiring. Another question around the lines of employee resource groups. How does one go about launching and growing ERGs? Do they form organically, or does HR create them? How do you get employees excited about them so they can engage?
Yeah, so I would say HR is an agency that helps us do this. That doesn't mean it's their absolute responsibility and accountability to make it happen.
Absolutely.
We use them because they are, first of all, in every location, and we have very enthusiastic leaders in the team to take the agenda forward. So they become the facilitators of sorts in different geographies that we work in. We have seen as we've launched the programs and then getting these councils and work groups created, there's a lot of participation coming from people. And with this virtual working environment, it become even more practically possible to make it happen. Earlier, it used to happen so that you were working in different shifts and so on and so forth. The physical presence was literally very difficult. But with this virtual working, it's become even more possible and pervasive. So we are seeing that.
Yeah, I'm sure hybrid has its own challenges coming, and yeah, that's for another day of discussion perhaps. I just wanted to understand, since also one of the last questions I want to ask you probably is you're so passionate about DEI and music apparently, because you started off your slides with the rock band and the music and the whole the way you drew parallel. Any plans of bringing them together sometime in the future personally, sir?
Not thought about it yet. I think they're enough on our plates right now to work on, but yeah, we'll definitely take that as a clue and a question as well to work on.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Prabhakar. It was really amazing. It was a very eye-opening session for me personally, and I'm sure everyone here enjoyed. And thank you. Looking forward to seeing that happen someday. The bringing together of both your passions. So all the best, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to leave our audience with tomorrow's agenda. And thank you so much. And in tomorrow's session, we have two more leaders from Strive coming and joining us. We have Deal Dusia, Talent Acquisition Lead Strive, a result-driven TA professional with passion for sourcing and identifying top talents. Zeal's motto is to make human resources more humane. And Vinita Vipin Mohandas, AVP Operations Strive, who is passionate about investing time and effort in developing human capital and considers it a must-have skill to thrive amidst the current uncertain times. They will be discussing on the topic, Winning Inclusion Policy, Significance of DE&I. You can also catch the rest of the agenda at our portal, myavatar.com. On behalf of Team Avatar and MyAvatar, I would like to thank each of you and welcome you to the rest of Diversity Mahotsav through this week. We would like to thank our partners, Ideology Partners, Cognizant, HCL Technologies Limited, and Strive. Supporting partners, Forasia India Private Limited, Logitech Engineering and Designs India Private Limited, Saint Gobain India Private Limited, Sodexo and Zorian Solutions, and community partner NASCOM. Our social media hashtags are hashtag Diversity Mahotsav, hashtag Celebrating Diversity. Do post your experiences and learnings on your social media handles with these hashtags. And if you haven't registered yourself at myavatar.com, please log in today and register yourself. It's www.myavatar.com. Explore the new and improved portal, which showcases exciting job opportunities with inclusive companies, as also other activities in our portal that celebrate diversity. Browse through to find jobs that might suit your skill sets, read articles of interest, and upskill yourself with various webinars conducted exclusively for you. Do join us tomorrow sharp at 4 p.m. for yet another insightful session. You can also view Diversity Mahotsav series on our YouTube channel, Avatar, the Power of Diversity. The link is posted in the chat box. In case you missed our previous days, please do click on the YouTube link to watch all the previous episodes. This is Rashmi Ravindran signing off. Have a great evening and stay safe. Thank you, Mr. Bisset.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.